Jai Baba, everyone, welcome. We're happy to be here today to celebrate the life of one of Meher Baba's great disciples. She certainly has impacted all of our lives here on the East Coast and from all over the world with her efforts to find a spiritual center for Meher Baba. So, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Karen Talbot. She's got a nice bio for us. And then after that, I've got a little bit of film or shots of her so we can kind of look at Elizabeth again, and then maybe some sharing. So I'll turn it over to you, Karen. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, I want to make sure that you can hear me now.
Oh, yes, we're
Oh,
good.
good. Okay. All right. Well, this is an honor. And also everyone that's listening, if you have anything to add or any changes or anything like that at the end, please do let me know. Here, Baba. Okay. Elizabeth Chapin Patterson was born in Chicago, Illinois on July 26th, 1896. Her parents were Simeon Brooks Chapin and Elizabeth Matlocks. And I think the mother went by the name Bess. She was the second child born in her family, and she had 3 siblings. The family moved to New York City when she was 5 years old. During World War I, she became a Red Cross ambulance driver. She worked as an insurance agent. She was one of 5 foreigners on a scientific expedition to the North Pole. And she led a very active, very busy life, traveling all over the world, including India. In 1929, she married Kenneth Askew Patterson, an insurance agent and pianist. Elizabeth was also very religious. She, in New York, would frequent the North Node bookstore owned by Malcolm Schloss and Jean Adriel. She learned of Baba from them. Jean wrote a letter to Elizabeth letting her to know of Baba's upcoming visit to Harmon-on-Hudson on November 17th, 1931. Baba actually told Jean he wanted to meet her, so Jean phoned Elizabeth, told her about the date, gave her directions to Harmon-on-the-Hudson. Elizabeth had a lunch date that day with a friend of hers named Schatz Adam Weicker. So instead of having lunch together, they both went to meet Baba. Elizabeth became one of Baba's earliest American devotees. She later described her initial meeting with Baba as, "When I looked at Baba, I recognized him. I kept trying to remember where I'd seen him before. He didn't look like anyone I'd met in India, where I had been before, or any other place. It was absolute recognition. I can only think now what a difference a day makes in the course of one's whole life. My experience was that of meeting someone I had always known. It was one of recognition from the recesses of forgotten time, and at the same time, a portent of the future." Elizabeth met Norina, Countess Nadine Tolstoy, the very same day. Meher Baba returned to the U.S. in 1932 and stayed in New York for 3 days. On May 21st, Elizabeth drove him through Central Park. And this was significant because it was the very first time she drove for Baba, and she became his driver for many, many years times. And his sign for her, he had more than one, but his sign was holding onto a steering wheel as his driver. On the 23rd, Baba arrived at Harmon-on-Hudson. On the 24th of May, 1932, Elizabeth came there to meet Baba. Of the meeting that day, Elizabeth wrote, and this is about the wildflower. "Vividly, I remember the beautiful late spring morning of May 24th when Norina, Anita, and I motored 35 miles from New York to join Baba's party for a day in the country. Baba greeted us with a warm embrace, and we found a number of visitors had gathered there already. Baba led us outside to the stone terrace and then along a path to a field with wildflowers. Someone here and there picking the flowers, but I stayed close to Baba. He quietly picked a small pink flower and handed it to me. He motioned to Kakabaria, one of the men Mandali who was near with Baba's alphabet board, and Baba spelled out slowly that I should always keep the flower and should write down the date, that someday I would know the meaning. When I got home that evening, I pasted it inside the cover of my New Testament and wrote down Baba, May 24th, 1932. In 1933, she visited India at Baba's invitation. Baba asked her to go back with Norina. In 1934, when Baba returned to the US and was in Hollywood, she worked on a motion picture project and also was one of the people when Baba went up to Oceano and stayed with the people at Moy Mel and the Dew Nights. And that's quite interesting. She returned to India December 8th, 1936, with Norina, Jean and Malcolm, Rano and Nani, and they were all members and went to Nasik. And there Elizabeth was part of the Nasik ashram. Loving pets, she brought her dog Kippy with her. When Baba arrived in Europe in 1937, Norina and Elizabeth met Adi Sr., Baidul Mohammed at Marseille and drove them to Cannes on October 8th. And so she was there and would have been with Mira and the other women at that time. What was significant was that back in India, in February 1938, she was there for quite a while. And then on May 6th, Baba and the women Mandali accompanied her to the Tiger Valley Cave at Panchgani. She was instructed by Baba to stay there for 12 hours. And here is her account. And this is something she asked Baba if she could. At 6 p.m. exactly, Baba locked me in, giving me the key inside. The last thing I remembered before everyone left me shut in alone for the night was Baba's hand extended through the iron bars, resting on my head as if in blessing. The moment all had disappeared around the bend of the path, there was profound stillness. Fleeting thoughts passed through my mind, but these I controlled as Baba had instructed me, that I should concentrate throughout the night and not sleep unless I could keep my eyes open any longer. She became the main driver of the Blue Bus tours. Kippy, the dog, went along with her on that trip. On May 10th, Baba brought 2 more puppies, Bingo and Jingo. She took care of those dogs too. She went to the bazaar on one occasion and bought the peacock Moti. And she went on an errand at the Quetta railway station where she found a large black water spaniel following her. She found out that the dog had been abandoned, and that dog she named Foundy. She and Norina worked diligently on the Meher Baba journals. They contain articles, discourses, and Baba's quotes. She, in fact, was the editor, and these have been compiled by Shariar Books in Treasures from the Meher Baba journals. Baba asked Norina, Nadine, and her to return to the US in 1941 and to find a spiritual center. Elizabeth took Kippy and Foundy with her, and She, Norina, and Nadine lived in an apartment in New York City where they spread Baba's message of love and truth. The story of this unique center, which Baba called his home in the West, is a story of the boundless love of Elizabeth Patterson, the tireless dedication of Norina and other devoted ones. Mani wrote, "The Meher Center is the fruit of Elizabeth Patterson's love for Baba. The seed was sown by Baba and it grew under his direct guidance. The beloved denies performing miracles, but the Meher Spiritual Center is undeniably a miracle of his love." Baba said the property might be any place in America, but should have an equitable climate, ample water, virgin soil, tillable land, and given from the heart. They took off, and Elizabeth visited her father, Simeon Chapin, in 1943. In 1944, he donated 500 acres to his daughter for the development of the Meher Spiritual Center. Darwin and Jean Shaw, John Bass, Frank Eaton moved to the center, moved to Myrtle Beach, and they worked to clear the brush, create paths, and establish the center. Elizabeth and Norina returned to India in 1947. And so at that time, Darwin and others took over and lived there while at Yopan Dunes while she was gone. Elizabeth invited Baba to come to America to open the center in Myrtle Beach. She wanted him to be the first to stay there to bless the center with his presence. She arranged for their tickets, met them in New York, and escorted them to the center. Baba stayed in Baba's house. The women stayed in the guest house, a special cottage Elizabeth had built for the 4 women who accompanied Baba on that trip: Mira, Mani, Meru, and Dr. Goher. Baba spelled out on his alphabet board, with Mani interpreting, how happy he was to be at the center, and most of all, how deeply touched he was with the love, devotion, and work sown by both Elizabeth and Norina throughout the past years in preparing such a unique spot for his work and comfort. No detail, no expense had been spared to carry out his wishes. All had been a labor of love, direct from the heart, and as such, he accepted the gift. After embracing Elizabeth and Norina, he said, "I have had many homes this time. I have laid my head on the ground in palaces and on concrete floors of humble homes." Then Baba gestured all over the center and continued, "Of all the homes I have visited, this is the home that I love the best, because it was given to me and built for me with such love." After a bit, he added, "I never leave. Remember, I do not leave, because this is my home." After the center stay, the entourage left Myrtle Beach to drive across the country to California. Elizabeth was the driver of one of 3 cars. On May 24th, while driving through Prague, Oklahoma, a car was barreling down the center of the road straight at her. The car was driven by a paraplegic. For the first time, he was driving in a car specially built for him. Elizabeth was seriously injured in the accident, as were Baba, Mira, and Meru. Elizabeth never called attention to herself until the others were on their way in the ambulance to the hospital in Prague. After they spent necessarily time getting the medical care they needed in Prague, they left by ambulance to Elizabeth's family home in Myrtle Beach, and that was Yopan Dunes, to recuperate. And also during that trip, that's when Baba asked Kitty to stay in Myrtle Beach and be Elizabeth's right-hand helper. Now, if you remember, years before, on May 24th, 1932, Baba at Harmon-on-Hudson had plucked a small pink wildflower and gave it to Elizabeth and asked her to remember the date, which coincided 20 years later with May 24th, 1952. And of that, Elizabeth said, through the experience of sharing Baba's suffering to a degree, I feel my life, instead of being nearly cut off, was extended for a purpose. The gift of the little flower was grace from the Master to be treasured in the heart. Baba revisited America in 1956, spending 4 days in Myrtle Beach. And Elizabeth, as always, tended to each and every detail of his visit to the Maher Center. Norina died on June 15th in 1957. Before dying, she told Elizabeth, "Don't grieve for me, let me go." So shortly thereafter, Kitty and Elizabeth saw a play at the local theater, and they met Jane Haynes. Baba said they were spiritual twins. So Jane was directing a play in Myrtle Beach when she learned of the spiritual center and met Elizabeth. And she brought her children, John, Charles, and Wendy, to live in Myrtle Beach and became very close with Elizabeth and with Kitty. Baba returned in 1958. And that's when Jane, John, Charles, and Wendy were able to meet Baba for the first time, and they were able to assist Elizabeth in the visit itself. The next time that they all traveled back to India was in 1962 for the East-West Gathering. And I believe that was the last time Elizabeth saw Baba, but communication continued throughout. On January 31st at 2 a.m. in the morning, Elizabeth woke up suddenly from a sound sleep, which sat upright in bed, and heard these words of scripture from a favorite hymn. I know that my Redeemer liveth. As it happened, that was the exact time that Meher Baba left his body. She went back for the last darshan and continued to care lovingly for the Meher Center, seeing to each and every detail, maintaining the center in the same manner that it would be in case Baba ever would come. She wanted it to be the same way it should be if Baba would be there once again. The Persian name that Baba gave Elizabeth was Dilruba, which means one who steals hearts. Elizabeth passed away on December 6, 1980. She died in Myrtle Beach after a lifetime of service to Meher Baba. Her ashes were later brought to Mehrabad and interred in the cemetery near Baba's Samadhi. There's also a memorial to Elizabeth between Dilruba and Baba's house at the Meher Spiritual Center. A coat Baba gave her to wear on the blue bus tours is buried there. Baba said about Elizabeth's service, her intense love and dedication to me are beyond words. Besides the center, she has done so much for me. You have little idea. Another, he called her his rock. And so another way that he called for her was by a fist to show a rock. And I'm going to let the meeting continue. And if there's time later, I have things that Kitty, Mommy, Mara, and others said about Elizabeth. So thank you for listening, and Jai Baba. What a wonderful soul.
Jai Baba. Thank you once again for just such an impressive bio. It brings us to her spirit, there's no doubt. So I'm going to go ahead and just show this video and we can start sharing after that. Jai Baba.
Everything is God's, nothing's mine. Let my resolve be this design. May you be first in all my thoughts, in all my words, in all my deeds. You are love's sweetest song to me. In your arms I long to be. And may I always try to lay my shadow self aside, so that you, the sun, will shine through. The love at one, you are love's sweetest song to me. In your arms I long to be. A child's sweetest memory. In your arms I long to
Okay. Wow. Okay.
That was beautiful, Ruthie. Boy, that was a nice one.
Sorry, I was having trouble coming out of there. Yeah, this song actually was written by Buzz and Wendy. So Wendy was part of that lyrical adoration of the beloved in that song, just taking it from the aspect of a child's love for the beloved. And also just a reminder, of course, that Wendy and Charles kind of grew up with all that influence from Elizabeth in their lives. Kitty as well, but they were so close that, you know, that trio of John and Charles and Wendy to Kitty and Elizabeth and of course Jane. So anyway, just wanted to say that. The first time I saw her, she was walking up some steps to the gateway, and she struck me. I had heard about her from some of the guys, and the guys were scared to death of her. I mean, she was formidable, and she would say it to them. I look at Alan. I'm telling you, I know a couple of guys that, they were like, whoa, she'll bust you in a minute. And she'll catch you and she'll bust you. No problem. She doesn't have a problem with that. And so I was scared of her. And I saw her as we were pulling through the gate, I guess, at the gateway steps going in. So I did what I could to avoid her and meeting her because I knew she'd see right through my stuff. I was totally transparent. I thought I was cool, but she would know. So, and she did know, which is so amazing. I guess I'll go on just for a minute more. The rest of it was one of the guys from Pittsburgh decided that he would talk to Elizabeth about my problem and that I was scared of her. And we were getting ready to leave. We had come for a week or two, I don't know, driving down in the car from Pittsburgh. It was a long ride. We came for a week or two, and then it was time to go, like the next day or the day after we were leaving. And so he came back from visiting with Elizabeth and said, she wants you to call her. And the next time we come to the center, she wants you to make an appointment to see her. So you have to call her. So went up to the original kitchen where the phone used to be, between the kitchen and the dining room in that little alcove, and dialed the number, scared to death. And she picked up, and I said, this is Ruth. Kevin told me to call you. And she said, oh, Ruth, how's your center stay been? Oh, I'm sure it's just been lovely, wonderful. She said, are your parents very close to God? Do they have any kind of a spiritual life? Well, they must, or you wouldn't be here. And then I forget what else she said. She said like a couple of things and then answered every question so that I didn't have to say anything. She just was so smooth. I had never experienced her like that. And I'm sure I never would again, but it was this incredible kind compassion just coming through the phone like, hey, I'm not that bad. I'm actually pretty cool. So by the time the conversation was over, I was more relaxed. And of course, I made an appointment the next time. And that's another whole story. But just that, I don't know, as Karen's bio ended, and or somewhere in the bio, she talked about Elizabeth tending to the details. And I mean, she could have just said to Kevin, oh yeah, well, she'll work it out. But no, she reached out, and in the most loving, gentle, soft way. So I received that. It was an incredible thing. I had heard about some of her life going to the North Pole and just this amazing woman. So to have her be so sweet and soft with me really was amazing. So that's my story, or one of them, and I'm sure there are others. So don't hesitate if you'd like to share. Yeah, Betty. You have to unmute, darling.
As Karen was rereading her bio, I went and looked up Lord Mayor and found this really sweet paragraph that I'll read about Elizabeth's mother, Bess. And Karen, I'll send this to you to add to your bio. It was not. This was now in the 30s. 1938. It was not always easy for these Westerners to leave their friends and family to join Baba in India, especially when their families did not follow Baba. Elizabeth's mother, Bess, who had met Baba in 1932, wrote her a wonderful, encouraging note stating, "If it were not your happiness and your complete conviction that takes you so far." But instead, some stern duty or sacrifice, we should really mourn. But since you are following the light of your spirit, my spirit will keep its little candle, dear, burning bright until I see you again. But I want you to know that your months with us have been a joy and a comfort. You have been so thoughtful and kind, gentle and sweet. I cannot but see the lovely results of your association with Baba and his ministry of illuminating love. So sweet. Maybe you've had this, Karen. I'm sure you've done a lot.
No, I know I've read it, but please send it to me and send me where exactly you found it because it is so beautiful.
I'll do it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Betty. Wow, what a mother, huh?
Both parents, the father and the mother.
I was just going to say the same thing that, yeah. Yeah. So, anybody else? I don't want to hog the time.
I want to share one thing that I might not have mentioned, and that is that the women Mandali, their name for Elizabeth was Yes, Baba dear, because everything that Baba asked of her, her immediate reply was Yes, Baba dear.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing to remember ourselves. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak a little bit about Elizabeth? Elizabeth.
You said you had another story. That's time to hear it.
Okay. Okay. I'll tell this one. I was just a kid. You have to understand. I was like 21 or something, 20. I don't know. I was just a kid. And we went to the center. And again, I'm from Pittsburgh, where it's not as hot as coming into the South. So, but at the center, I wore cutoff jeans, and then I'd wear these shirts, and the shirts would expose my stomach. They'd be up high, they're wearing them now too, probably. So anyway, I went to the center. We drove down one overnight. I forget how many of us were in the car. And we got to a pancake place and we got breakfast. Well, my blood sugar dropped. I'm diabetic. My blood sugar dropped so dramatically that I seized. I had a seizure in the restaurant. I went out and seized. So I was sitting there next to my friend, same guy that made me, talk to Elizabeth about me. I was sitting next to him and everybody's chatting around the table. And I kind of hit him and said, "This isn't good." And it felt like my chest opened like a door and the ocean rushed in. And that's when I went out and had a seizure, and they called an ambulance, and I woke up at the hospital and they were giving me sugar water. And in the meantime, I had bitten my tongue with the seizure. So they gave me the sugar water and kind of got me all balanced out at the emergency room, let me go, and we went on to the center. And so at that time, if you had something wrong, you were to report it to Kitty or Elizabeth. So I called and I told Elizabeth about it, and she said, "Well, you're going with me, dear, to my doctor tomorrow. I'll take you." So I said, "Okay." She said, "Be at my room at 9:30. So I went to her bedroom at 9:30 in my little outfit, and she went, "Oh no," she said, "No, no, no, dear." She said, I just love the way she was just so cool. "No," she said, "we don't show our midriff. In India, they'll show a breast before they'll show their midriff." I said, and I thought, oh my. So I don't know if I went and changed my shirt or what happened, but it was something that impacted me. Like, no, no, that was not good. So we went on to the doctor. Well, anyway, she took me to the doctor, dropped me off. And again, I'm this little northerner. And I walk in, and the receptionist said, "Hello, no, let me see. She said, "How may I help you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm here to see the doctor." I mean, I just picked up on this Southern accent. I didn't mean to mock her, but it was just so amazingly strong right out of the gate that I just went right there. Oh, what a crazy 21-year-old. So she said, "Well, if you just have a seat, the doctor will be with you in a minute." And I said, "Well, thank you so very much." And I sat down and I had to do that the whole time. And I couldn't, I just had to keep doing that until the doctor examined me and I got out of there. And Elizabeth was out there with her station wagon waiting for me and took me back to the center. And I'm trying to remember, they were always so solicitous if there was something wrong. And being diabetic and having all this crap, physical crap, I would go to the center and something would fall, the bottom would fall out, and I'd have to call Kitty or Elizabeth and talk to them about it. And they always had such, "Well, we'll have so and so bring you some soup over. Now I want you to go back to your cabin, lay in your bed." I had like peritonsillar abscess one year. They were always so just solicitous that I wasn't frightened about what was going on. It was like I was at home. My mom was there. My mom was going to take care of things, get me to the doctor or get me the right soup or just treat me in that most loving, kind way. That's Baba's way, that Baba's here because it just shines out of them. So that's my story. Oh, and then years later, I worked at a lab. It was called electrophysiology. And what we did was we put pacemaker wires, temporary pacemaker wires, into patients to look at the arrhythmia that they had to see if it was lethal or not. And an Indian woman came in once and she spoke no English. No, there was no interpreter. I think maybe I don't even know if her daughter was at the doorway, and then I brought her into the lab and it was just she and I. And I remembered Elizabeth talking about the midriff. So I made it clear to the woman that what we would do would put a towel over that midriff because we had to remove, stuff to be able to get the pacemaker wire in. So I covered her midriff and she was so grateful. And then when we got back with her family, I think she told them about that. So, again, Elizabeth's love kind of coming down through the years that I was able to pass on to this woman and make her comfortable in our lab. So that's some of my stories of Elizabeth Patterson.
Very beautiful and heartwarming. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking, honey. Yes, Alan, I see your hand up. You have to unmute, though. Yeah.
Okay. Well, first off, I want to say that from my angle, Elizabeth Patterson was probably the greatest American who ever lived. This came to my attention by John Foreman years ago. When he asked me who was the greatest American who ever lived, I said Washington. I was a history major, American history major. He went, "No." I said, "Lincoln?" He said, "No." He says, "Elizabeth Patterson. Think about it." So I took about 3 seconds. I said, "Absolutely." She founded the Center for the Avatar. What greater thing? She's not known. Now, I want to say something that's kind of humorous. When Ruth said that people were afraid of Elizabeth, I heard that later from Karen. When she first met Elizabeth, she was a little bit nervous, and this is when we were married, although she lived in Myrtle Beach for many years. I had no problem with Elizabeth. I met her in 71, my first trip to the center. And in fact, I was more friendly with her, although I was very friendly with Kitty, until Elizabeth died. She was very eager to hear from me because I had a business starting. I had a business when I first met her, a natural food store in Berkeley, and she didn't have too many young people who had businesses, although I had hair down to my butt and a beard to my middle chest. And so she would always spend time when I would come to the center to hear how we were going. And it was always amazing to me that people were terrified. As Karen said, if we got called by Elizabeth, it's like being called into the vice principal's office. But I had none of that with her. She was, after Joseph Hart, who lived out here where I live, my second mentor. So in 1976, I had a trip to the center in June. And right before that, my employees, there was a wave of unionism, that's a whole story, in Berkeley. And my employees unionized me. It was a retail clerks union. So before I went to the Myrtle Beach, I went to Philadelphia from whence I came. And all my family members were giving me advice. So when I went to Myrtle Beach, I saw Elizabeth pretty much straight away. And she wanted to hear the story. So she would ask me questions. And again, we were very friendly. It was very natural between us. There was no, like, you're the boss and I'm just, a frightened pilgrim. It was very sweet. I didn't know other people were frightened of her, frankly. But after a while, she had a pensive look. She said something in the vein of, "Could you do me a favor?" I said, "Of course." I said, "You've been getting a lot of advice from many people. So do me this. If you have a problem dealing with the union," and I would, "just call me. I'll be your counsel." And as when she said that to me, I thought to myself, it was pretty emotional. Here's the greatest, it's unimaginably how great this woman was. And she was so busy running the center, yet she said to me that she would have time to be my counsel. And she said, "Don't talk to anybody else about this, just talk to me." And it gave me great courage at that time. I won't get into the whole story, but I'll say this. Because of that, I didn't talk to many people. I did get a company that represented me. I lost anyway, but she was, it was quite interesting to me, the profound interest she took in me all through those years. One of the last time we saw Elizabeth, Karen and I were in Myrtle Beach. Got through it. We got married in December of 79. I took the bar exam right now, 1980. And right after I took the bar exam, we went to India and spent many weeks there. And Myrtle, also up in northern India with Patterson, who just passed away. That's a great story. And then we went back to Myrtle Beach. He'd been away for months. And this was October of 1980. She was going to die December 6th. So at the center, there was nobody there. It's October. The viewers were in the farm shed. They had just got booted out of Sufism, another old story. And we were in the twin. There was two twins in those days, the big twin and the little twin. We were in the little twin. And the big twin was Elaine Billow. That's the whole story itself. She'd never been there before. She'd been in the ashram with Elizabeth. He was a long talker. In any event, let's say for the sake of the story, we're leaving on Thursday. So this was a Tuesday. And I said to Karen, let's go to Del Ruba and say goodbye to Elizabeth. So we walked down to Del Ruba. And when we got there, we found a most unusual scene. Elizabeth had just pulled up in the parking lot and was getting out of her car. And she was standing behind the driver's door. She had not parked. She was in the middle of the parking lot. In front of us, and about 10 feet or so from Elizabeth, and he was just behind her, was Elaine Billow. And Elaine was who knew Elizabeth from the ashram in the late 30s, and although was a generation younger.
Excuse me, Alan, could you speak louder?
Louder, don't you have?
Yes. I can't hear you.
Who is it?
Alan, you
Tina.
need to speak louder. I can't hear you and I'm in the same house.
So where do I speak into that's louder?
Just talk a little louder.
All right, I'll speak. I thought this was easy. All right, well, in any event, in front of us again was Elaine Billow, and about 10 feet from Elizabeth. Whoever couldn't hear me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And she was talking to Elizabeth and telling her how much she enjoyed her stay at the center, that she had never been there before, which was true, and was going over how her stay was. And Elizabeth was just standing behind the door quietly. And after some time, Elaine, who was doing all the talking, said to Elizabeth, and I want to thank you so much for doing this center. And Elizabeth said to Elaine, who she had known for over 40 years at that point, put her right hand out like that towards the center. Do you think, in this tone, although I'm going to have to be louder than Elizabeth was, do you think I would have done any of this had Baba not asked me to? And she immediately turned away and started walking towards Dilruba, leaving Elaine standing there. I said to Karen, let's go. And we walked up to Dilruba. Elizabeth was about to enter the front door, and I said, Elizabeth, Karen and I are leaving on, as I say, Thursday, make a day up. And we wanted to say goodbye. Karen was a step below me. And she looked at me in a look I've never seen before in my life, nor after, in a far away look, wistful, with her eyes gazing out across the center. This is all in 2 seconds. Probably a little bit thoughtful of what Elaine had just said to her. Turned around and walked into Dilruba, not speaking to Karen or me. And we never saw her again. So I have many other stories, but I'm going to let them go until others have spoken.
Thank you, Alan. I just have to stop for a minute, take that in. There, Baba. Thank you, Alan. That was a beautiful story. Jai Baba. Mihal, Jai Baba.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have anything to say, but just to comment that it's very touching what you said, what you told about the story, both of them. And the last one really touched my heart because she was knowing that she was departing and she was, finishing her karma here. But the thing with the advice, if I remember right, I heard many stories from your store that people got to Baba through that. So I'm not surprised that that Baba through Elizabeth said that you should not take advice from anyone but her advice coming from Baba to you, because you were conduit to many people coming to Baba through that store. So that just, came to my mind when you were sharing. I'm so moved. I don't know. All these stories, really moving.
Thank you, Mihal. I just want to add this, my perception of what was going on with people having issues with Elizabeth, or the guys especially being afraid of her. We're talking about 20-year-old hippies. Alan, you had direction, you were moving in it. These were people that had no idea what to do with their lives, no idea what was going on. They were, just kind of, senseless about things. They hadn't any maturity. So I think that's what Elizabeth would kind of spotlight for them. And so I think at that point, a lot of people got their acts together. And even though they were young, they got into college or found a job. And so I think Elizabeth had that impact. She brought forth that responsibility, that mindfulness of life with Baba. As hippies, we were just happy, floating in the honeymoon period. So I think she helped a lot of guys in that way. Meow.
Yeah, so about this thing, what I think, because of my experience in Mehrabad, especially about Merab, that I had this very great connection with her, but I was always sitting on the side, and I would not have approached her unless someone pushed me on her. And I'm very thankful, because we must approach those people and come to them. It's not only that they will come to us. We have to make this one time at least approach to them. So when I think about it over the years, I understand why it was, because these souls are so great. They are very great. So their energy boundaries are huge. And this energy boundary that is so huge, our bodies sense it. Our bodies, not our minds. And when our bodies sense it, we find it hard to approach. So it's not actually fear, because they were not people to be afraid of. None of us could be afraid of any of them, except maybe Padre when he used to open his mouth and say some things, really tough. And but all that was so gentle, and it's so kind, and so I think that's what was the thing that was explained. Each one explained to themselves that they were afraid of them, but it's this huge boundary of energy that was coming out of them, and that is what I think we have in our bodies sense that. So if it resonates with anyone, that's my share about this.
I think that's great insight. It's exactly how it felt. For me, anyway. Yes, Betty. Jai Baba.
This story is really not my story. It's Jim Wilson's story, my good friend Jim out here in Oregon, he and his wife Jean lived with their children in Myrtle Beach for a time in the 70s, I believe. It's a great story. He and Ray Appel did construction work at the center, and they were involved with building the meeting place. And Elizabeth had instructed them to find rose pine to use, I guess, for the something there, maybe I don't know, the inside part. And they looked and looked and looked and could not find it, couldn't find this rose pine. So they bought very similar white pine. And Jim said, you know, you couldn't tell the difference. That was Jim's comment. So they had the white pine delivered. And Elizabeth, I don't know, happened to come out. I don't know. She came out, saw the white pine, and said to him, you know what, I had told you to get rose pine. And they said, well, we couldn't find it, Elizabeth. We looked and looked, so we ordered this. And her comment was, you did not have the authority to make that decision. She said, I'm going to make a few phone calls. And of course, she found the rose pine and straightened that out. So anyway, this is Jim's story, Jim Wilson's story about that little time.
It sounds like this was another fella schooled by Elizabeth.
Right.
Yeah. Thank God. I don't know how she dealt with this. Judy. Good morning, Judy. Jai Baba. Thanks, Betty.
Good morning. I didn't have the good fortune to meet Elizabeth in person, but I have a connection with her that's very close to my heart. And I'll share it with you. I don't share it often. It was on my first pilgrimage to Baba. I'd been with him since the day he dropped his body, but he had me wait 17 years to get to Mehrabad. And I'd been there for 2 or 3 days, not long. And that morning, I woke up about 5 o'clock and felt this heart pull to go up to Baba's Samadhi. Didn't know anything about the rules or, that you weren't supposed to leave before 6 in the morning and, things like that. So I, went out the front and started walking, from the Pilgrim Center across the road and across the railroad tracks. And when I crossed the railroad tracks, starting up the hill, Baba appeared next to me in full form and he took my left hand in his right hand, and he was as tangible as if I embraced or took your hands. And he walked me up the hill, his hill. And as we got close to the Samadhi, he didn't take me to his Samadhi. And there was no one around because it was so early in the morning. He directed me to the left of the Samadhi and took me over to the women's graves. But specifically, he took me to Elizabeth's grave. And I looked up at him as he looked down at Elizabeth's grave. And he said to me in audible words that I heard his voice. And he said, Elizabeth loves me so much. And it was Baba's love for Elizabeth and his being so touched by her love for him he seemed so grateful. It was he for his own reasons gave me this glimpse of this love and beloved relationship that Baba had with Elizabeth. And he had it. It wasn't just her. He was so touched by Elizabeth's love for him. And that's my connection. When I came back, actually, Mara asked on that pilgrimage, I was there for a month, and this was just one of the first days. And toward the end, about 3 weeks out, there were about 40 people, women on Mara's porch, and 3 big rows of the seating that the stool. Well, they're not stools. Anyway, the guys were all off the porch and so forth. But she asked 3 times, has anyone had an experience of Mayor Baba while they've been here on pilgrimage? And I heard it's the first time, and, knew that I'd had one, but I didn't say anything. I'd been taught inwardly that you don't speak of these things. And someone talked about a dream they'd had once long ago, but it wasn't. And Mara asked a second time, and somebody else said something that was even less relevant to her actual question. And the third time that she asked, it's like I felt Baba nudging me to, it's Judy. And so I shared the experience that I had, which actually there's much more involved, but we're focusing on Elizabeth today. And I still, over the years, rarely shared that experience. At the end of my sharing with Mara, and I was on one of the little stools, just kitty corner from her, so just a few feet away. In my awareness, I was simply talking with Mara. I didn't really, I didn't think that there were 40 some people listening in. And then fast forward, like almost 30 or not quite 40 years. I've been at that point, I'd been a resident at Maribod for, I don't know, 12 years or something. And it was a late afternoon. I don't know if it was I think it was not a Pilgrim's Day. And so I was at the porch, and Mayru asked me out of the blue. This is Mayru that went on The New Life with Baba, Mara's niece that spent her whole life serving Mara, taking care of her. And she looks at me and she says, Judy, tell me about Mara. It's like, me? And I shared with Mayru another experience I had during that first. I wasn't intending to share this, but Baba seems to be bringing it out. So that I don't forget it, I will share what I'm trying to say right now and then the experience. So I shared another experience with Mayru that I had on that first pilgrimage. And at the end, at the end, Mayru said to me, Judy, it's really good that you have been holding these in your heart all these years. And the feeling I had from that was the words from the Bible about the Virgin Mary, who said, or the words of the Bible are, she kept these things and pondered them in her heart. And Mayru said to me that day in the early 2000s that it's good that you held them there all this time. Now, it's important that you share them with others because it helps others. And so on that same pilgrimage, and some of you I've shared this someplace publicly, so maybe folks have heard it, but I didn't know when I was going back. And so I didn't have, like everybody else had a specific time. I had a air ticket that I could come back when it was time for me to come back. So when it came time back in, so it's 86, and part of the reason of my being I had been tugging on Baba's shirt sleeve for years to get to Mehrabad, and I knew that Baba had said that Mara would live to be 80. I didn't know if that meant she would die when she was 80 or live longer, but she would live to be 80. And she was born in January 7th of 07. And it's like, Baba, this is October of 86. It's like and he got me there to be with Mara. And she was still having tea with the women. But each time she would, it would be time for tea, one of the gals, Casey or Devana, would come up to me and say, oh, Judy, you were on the list today, but the 2 Parsi women have come from Bombay, or, whatever it was. And, I'm so sorry, but, can we, because there was only so much room for those of you that had that good fortune of being there in those years in Baba's dining room to, for the women to sit. And so at least 3 times I had been on the list, but bounced. And each time, and this was Baba's gift to me completely during that whole pilgrimage, that I knew everything was perfect, just as it was. Whatever happened was his wish and will. I wish I had that every moment for the rest of my life. Not so good on my part, but Baba gave it to me then. And so I would respond, it's fine. It's no, and I think it was Devana that the 3rd time said, how can you, everybody, what, it's like, because they felt so awful that they had to have that role of bouncing me off. And anyway, finally it became my day. And I didn't know how things were done. So I just let everybody go in first. I didn't know that there was this sort of rush to get close to Mara because you couldn't hear her unless you were right next to her or right across the table. And so I was kitty corner, furthest possible place by the door, where I was sitting. But what Baba gave me was that Baba was there. He was sitting in his chair and he was having tea with all the women. And that's exactly the way that Mara treated, she would pour a cup of tea so lovingly and offer it so lovingly to Baba at his chair. But she didn't have the good fortune to see him. And I never told her directly that about my experience, which was not just that first tea of mine, but the other two that I was able to attend while I was during that month that I was there. But Baba wanted Mara to know. But what was so wonderful about that moment, the glimpse that I saw, that in many ways is similar to my experience with Baba at Elizabeth's tomb shrine, or, her little, where her urn is Baba's love pouring out for Mara with that tea and getting a glimpse of the love between the two of them. It was so beautiful, so pure, so so loving. And somehow I got a glimpse of that. But I accepted it as very natural, that it wasn't unusual. So I never thought, and I'd been taught inwardly to keep these things and ponder them in my heart, not to speak of them. So I never said anything to anyone while I was there. But on the way out of towns, I was in a car with 3 or 4 people, and one of them needed to stop at the trust office as we headed out to Bombay for our planes. And so I got out of the car for, the person was taking some time. And Devana came over to say goodbye and so forth. And I mentioned her. I said, Devana, when you see Mara, please tell her that Baba's really there when she offers her tea. And I saw him, and I saw him each time, and so forth. And I got in the car and went off and didn't think anything of it. And then the next time I was coming back, at some point, I think I was already a resident by then. And I walked into the dining room at the old PC, and Jeff Wolverton was there, and he was having tea with everyone and so forth. And so I sat at the far end of the table where there was a chair and just started to listen. And he was saying, And Mara said, but why didn't this girl tell me that Baba, was there? And Mara and Jeff said, and Mara paused and said, no, it's better that she didn't say anything, because if she had spoken about it, he wouldn't have shown himself to her. And I knew from what I could hear was that was my story. And Baba gave like tied it with a bow there so I could get the full, so that I could know. I mean, I didn't tell Mara, but she heard it meant something to her. And she also confirmed I was right in not speaking. And the one thing that I didn't work in quite the right place was when I told Mara on the porch, when she'd asked 3 times if anyone had experienced Baba while they were, an experience with Baba was her words, while you were here. And I told her directly about being at Elizabeth's grave, and the rest of that longer story that I've not shared today. And Mara looked at me, and her words to me were, Baba has truly given you his darshan, which I hold in my heart. And if Meru hadn't told me it's important to share, that's where it would still stay. But he's brought it out through Elizabeth today because he loved Elizabeth so much. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Thank you, Judy. Wonderful story. Wonderful stories, both of them.
So touching. Thank you. Thank you so much. I do feel that it is time to share before we leave the world. Yeah.
I always stop at the marker between Baba's house and Dilruba and spend some moments there with Elizabeth. It's a very sacred feeling and space. And in the early days, again, going back to when I was in my 20s with all the hippies, and we were down at the boathouse one night, and it was already magical. I mean, it was a magical night in the boathouse with the bass jumping up and jumping back in the water and the stars and maybe an alligator out there somewhere. It was mystery and wonder and Baba, and we were just having such a great time on the in the boathouse. And these older women walked in and sat down. Now, I can't tell you, I'm sure we had a conversation, but it turns out, and maybe at that point they had mentioned, but they were friends of Elizabeth's, and they were theosophists. And Elizabeth, opened her arms to them, staying on the center, and bringing their spiritual life there. So it was really kind of cool. And apparently Elizabeth at one point was also interested in the theosophists. So of course I had to go and look up what the theosophists were and what they believed. But the women were just astounding. Like, has been said earlier, there was such a huge presence and aura and energy around these wonderful souls that Baba brought to us. And these 2 women kind of had some of that going on. So anyway, and Karen, I think you still had something that you were able to bring for us. You have to unmute, darling.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, you can hear me now. Jai Baba. So again, there are a few things. One is that, and I think Charles, in his book, I just want to share this. The day becomes the answer, and where he got the title from. How did Elizabeth come to trust Baba so completely? One day I decided to ask Auntie Boo, that's what they called her, because she said when she was a child, she couldn't pronounce Elizabeth and she called herself Boo. So that's how they got Auntie. And when she met John, Charles, and Wendy, she told them her name was Boo, Auntie Boo. That's what they should call her. So one day I decided to ask Auntie Boo. I said, how do you know what Baba wants you to do each day? Without hesitation, she replied, every morning I take a few moments to listen in silence for Baba's guidance. Then she smiled and added, now he doesn't answer in so many words, but when I listen each morning, the day becomes the answer. That's this book that Charles wrote about her. I showed treasures from the Meher Baba journals. And I read this book on the airplane one time coming back from India. And it's called Letters of Love for Meher Baba. And this book was written by or compiled by Jane. Yeah, by Jane, compiled and edited by Jane Barry Haynes. And these are letters that Elizabeth and she wrote to each other. And you must know that Baba told Elizabeth to go for a vacation 1 month of every year. And Jane and Elizabeth would travel to a villa, other nunneries and places in Europe. And I found that interesting. The first time I came to the center, Wendy was there and Kitty was in India at the time. So most people met Kitty when they came to the center for the first time, but I actually met Elizabeth. And she asked me about my story. And the two women that brought me to the center at the time, I was living outside, and you don't want to know, but were Annie Bell, Annie Well Bell, and Kathy Haas Riley. And so I told Elizabeth a little bit, actually, maybe this was a different, but anyway, the first time I met her. And when I told her where I went to school and that I went to school in Albany, she remembered this bomb scare, which last week when we talked about Darwin, because I went to a talk about Darwin, and there was a bomb threat at the college when he went to speak. And that's what she reminded me of. So I was pleased by that. And also, she once gave me a ride on the center and asked where I was from. And I said, oh, I live off center. She did not like the off center. And so she told she changed it. No one after that, people said, well, not after that, because I mean, it must have been all in that time frame but for me, that's when I learned, she said, you're a part of the nearby community. Still like people being off center. She wanted them to be part of the nearby community. And the last thing I'm going to share, although I have so many other things, two more things. One is Baba called her unique. Margaret Krask had told her that when Margaret returned from India. And she was very touched by that. Back to the nearby community. That whole nearby community of Myrtle Beach knew about Baba because of Mrs. Patterson. And as Charles always mentions, Elizabeth would go to church every Sunday. And I think Charles asked her one time when he went with her, why do you go? What do you bring? And she said, I bring Baba to the church, which was very touching. And she wanted to be a member of the community in Myrtle Beach. And I think it was very important as she, brought the center and the Chapins, and because we used to shop at Chapin's department, that they had stores in downtown. I taught in Georgetown, South Carolina for my first teaching year in 1975. I was there for 2 years, and I had the most wonderful aide in my classroom, and her name was Betty Graham. And the first day or so I was there, we were introducing each other, getting to know each other. And I told her I lived in Myrtle Beach. She had grown up in Myrtle Beach. And when she looked at me and she knew I wasn't native, and especially at that time, it was very unique to come from the North. And she said, "Oh, Mrs. Patterson," because she had grown up there and she knew about the center, of course, wanted to know if it was in fact a nudist colony, which people thought at that time, which it wasn't. But Petty, she ended up coming to visit the center and myself in Myrtle Beach. So I just wanted to share some of those remembrances, J. Baba.
Yeah, it was a nudist colony and people were levitating.
Oh,
I don't know if you had that detail, but I did the app.
Yeah, I like the levitating.
We're levitating. Well,
We
Candy,
are levitating, I think. Yeah, sweet. Thank you, Karen. That was sweet too.
Candy, Jay Baba,
Hey, Baba.
good to see you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, as some of you know, I traveled in Spain with Elizabeth. And whenever she and Jane would come to, they would come to Spain because I lived in Spain. So they would come and we would meet up. And in Avila or in Sevilla. And we would go to the convents, the Saint Teresa convents. We would visit them. So I have too much to tell about that because that's there's so many things, but there are some things that stand out which are cute. For example, just to show the quirky side of Elizabeth, her sense of humor. One time, I always brought another Baba lover with me, all except for one time. And that was the last time I saw her. Anyway, one time I was sitting with my sister-in-law who I brought, with Elizabeth on a bench, and we were all sitting in a row, and we all had our purses on our laps with our hands folded over them, so you can picture. So we're all sitting like that, and Elizabeth turns to us and says, with a twinkle in her eyes, "It's like we're waiting for our boyfriends." It's so funny. Anyway, that was one thing. I could tell about the last time I saw her. No, I don't know. Maybe I'll tell about how I actually managed to get Don Stevens angry at me. Because in the past, I always thought that it would be impossible to make Don Stevens angry. He was always so balanced and so measured in his speaking. And I used to meet up with Don Stevens all the time. Sometimes we met like ships in the night. Like he would be at an airport and I would be in town and I would go see him at the airport. Anyway, one time, so during this time, it was the 70s, early 70s, and Elizabeth had written to me about meeting up in Spain. And I had this terrible trait of not being a good letter writer. I would often not return people's letters, or it would take me a really long time to do so. So I'm sitting with Don at the Miami airport, and we're having a scotch. And Don says to me, "Oh, by the way, I saw Elizabeth Patterson, and she asked how you were, and she said that she'd written to you about Spain." And I lightly said to Don, "Oh, yeah, that's right. I haven't answered her yet." And Don turned to me with his eyes wide, blazing, and he said, What? Someone as close to Meher Baba as Elizabeth Patterson writes to you and you don't answer immediately? And I was like, oh God, I wish the floor would open. I've never seen Don like that. Anyway, no, I meekly replied, I will. And see that you do. Anyway, and then it was over, of course. Don was back to his normal self. Anyway, yeah, I have lots of stories about Elizabeth. We went to a dive bar in Sevilla to see flamenco. Elizabeth had mentioned that she didn't want to see touristy flamenco because that was very, you had so many tourists coming and, that was very popular, touristy flamenco, but she did not want to see touristy. We asked the hotel concierge, and he directed us to a place that is still going today, Los Gallos. Anyway, I don't know what it's like today, but in those days, in the 70s, oh boy, it really was a dive bar. Smoky, completely filled with smoke because you could smoke everywhere. Anyway, so we went there and we had our drinks and we sat at this little table. Wendy was there. Wendy came on this trip. Wendy and I brought Anne Burgoyne, whoever anybody knows. There we were sitting at this little table and we saw this incredible flamenco. It was so good. I've never seen such good flamenco ever since then. And we just couldn't believe it, how Elizabeth sat there, in the smoky room. She was such a trooper. And she really enjoyed the flamenco too. And, it was really great. Anyway, yeah, lots of stories. I don't know how much time you have, but
We could certainly have one more. You're a treasure trove.
I can tell you the last story of the last time I saw her. It was not too long before she dropped her body and went to her beloved Baba. And that was kind of an interesting situation. That was the only time that I went up to see Jane and Elizabeth alone. And that was because I had been a really bad girl. And I wanted to leave my husband. I had a 2-year-old child. Wanted to leave my husband for a dashing, charming Spaniard. And so my husband thought, he paid for, he said, go up and see Elizabeth and Jane. And he figured that they would, say, tisk, tisk, you bad girl. Don't even think of it. And I even thought that too. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll go up there and I'll take what I'm going to be given, which is, probably get chewed out. So I went and I told the whole story to them. And Jane said, make sure you keep the kid. And Elizabeth said, well, if you love him, he must be special. And I was like, oh, wow, that's great. Now my path is clear. Anyway, so then, as I left, Elizabeth was sitting by the window and the curtains were mostly drawn. And she was sitting on the table, by a table. And I slowly closed the door, looking at her because, I don't know, I just wanted to gaze at her for the last few minutes. And what I saw was Elizabeth, and she probably wouldn't like me to tell you this. Elizabeth was in effulgent light, like those pictures that you see of angels. It was movement. The light was moving. It was emanating and moving all around. She was made of effulgent light. And I was looking at that and I thought, my eyes playing tricks on me. And I looked away and looked back again and it was still there. And I blinked and I just, but I just looked and that was what I saw. And so I looked for some time, about, I don't know how many minutes. And I finally closed the door. And I went home. When I went home, the brilliant, wonderful Spaniard had disappeared. I never saw him again. He was gone. Yeah, so that was that. And I was miserable, of course, but that's that. And I will just say one other thing, the way I like what the previous speaker said, that Baba ties things up with a bow, because he does. So I just happened to be at Mehrabad when Elizabeth's urn was there, and she was going to be buried. Her ashes were there, and she would be buried. So I was in the Samadhi with a whole bunch of other people, and waiting to bow down. And Mani poked her head in, and she said, "Candy, where's Candy?" Is Candy here? And I said, yeah, I'm here. And she said, everybody, let Candy bow down first. And then Candy, you need to come out here. And I thought, oh my God, they thought I did something wrong. Of course. So I bowed down and I came out. And Mara was there with Elizabeth's urn. And Mani thrust the umbrella in my hand. And she said, I want you to hold the umbrella over Meher's head when she gives Elizabeth's eulogy, which I did. So, and that was somehow that was tying the bow on my trip with Elizabeth and my relationship with her. So I have lots more to say, but probably we don't have time. So I've written it out.
So beautiful, Candy. So beautiful.
Yeah, Elizabeth was she was something else, boy, I tell you.
Right? One of a kind.
I know.
One of a kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those early days for us, just seeing someone like that, as has been said, trying to emulate that. Oh my God.
Well, Elizabeth, when we would traipse around Avila or Sevilla, she wore us out. I'm not kidding. She wore us out. She went in her little way. She was a real trooper, and she just went everywhere. And we would go back to the hotel room and flop on our beds. It's like, oh, and the first time we went to Avila, we got to our hotel, and you got a call. It was Elizabeth, and she said, "Turn on your radio right now." And we did, and it was Begin the Beginning.
Yeah. She really did. I mean, this has not been brought up directly, and I don't know how to even put it, but I'll just do my best. I mean, she had a sense of things. You know what I mean? She could see things. She could see you and things about you. And there was always that story about, I don't know, the original kitchen, and people were doing all kinds of weird hippie crap in the kitchen, and the phone rang, and it was Elizabeth. And she was saying, I understand that someone has a Ouija board out. Now you need to put that away. No dividing games at the center. And so that was that. And then the other one about the plane that flew over the center. I mean, this is so many years ago. Now the flight patterns, it's crazy. But some plane, I don't know if it was a seaplane or something, and they flew over the center, and Elizabeth was not having it. So she got in the station wagon and drove out to the airport and pulled up where the planes were and got out. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson," and she said, "Well, I just want to say, we have the spiritual center and it's quiet and we don't want planes flying directly over that center area. And so please, and they didn't. Mrs. Patterson asked and they listened. So she just,
Well, one of the things that I would say also is that you can imagine that because we would have the breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, and so there was a lot of talking, especially me. I loved it glad, and so there would be between Jane and Elizabeth and me and whoever I brought, and so the thing that was most uncanny about Elizabeth was that she would sit there quietly, and then she would say one thing, and it would be bam, it would be exactly, she would get to the crux of the matter exactly, and she would just, it was incredible how she would do that. And, she always did that, just quietly sitting one thing. And that was it. And yeah, so that was,
thank you, thank you. Yeah, she could drop the bomb. Uh, Richard J. Baba, thanks for your patience, honey.
Well, actually, I wasn't sure I was going to volunteer this. I've done it once before, and very few people have ever heard this story, mainly because it's to my chagrin. But Candy, I wanted to ask first, I would love to read some of your stories if they're written down, or where I might catch
oh
it.
yeah. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Angela told me to send my how I came to Baba's story to her, and all that, and I have that and other Baba stories, and also my travels with Elizabeth. So I was thinking about sending the whole lot to her. I don't know what she would do with them, but I think I might do that. I don't know if that sounds like a good idea to everybody or not, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, please.
so
If it's
yeah.
not too much of, I mean, it's probably going to be an effort, but
No, I've written it. It's like months ago. I spoke with Elizabeth, with Angela about it months ago, and she said, yeah, send it. And then I had to edit and rewrite and act blah, 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 and all these things.
right.
And yeah, so now it's pretty much done. And I think I might just send it over.
Hmm.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, so I have a story. Actually, it's two stories, but it turns out to be the same theme, involving Elizabeth directly. So I originally heard of Baba early, October 68 with Rick Chapman and Alan Cohen. And Baba didn't appear to me, but I was walking across this college campus after that, got an Appel, talk. And a friend of mine and I, it's really stuck, but we went to see Rick and Chapman in a little seminar room after this auditorium speech to college students. And of course, drugs were rampant all over the campus, northern Colorado and Fort Collins. But I wasn't going to school. My friend was. I was just hanging out, completely irresponsible. But to get back to the story of Elizabeth, yeah, there's a lot of what Ruthie was saying about the early must have been fun, really fun in the early 70s around the center. But so I went through this whole patch of being kind of like an itinerant no man's land. But what had happened was I had a very severe methadone drug overdose experience right after right after Baba sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, I am the reality you were looking for. And of course, I was just hanging out irresponsible, so I ignored the drug idea. But anyway, so onward ho. So I was in a psychic state of tremendous dysfunction, but without going too far into that, I don't even know if I could explain it. But it wasn't a psychological problem. It was something else. But anyway, so at about 1977, I suddenly bought a copy. I was hanging out in Denver downtown, just living wherever possible. Back then you could, stay in a basement or do anything. But so I got this book and I started thinking. So I got the address out of the back of this man to God and God to man, and wrote Adi Kearani. Well, I wrote to India. He wrote back, said, I will be in Myrtle Beach in like June, I think it was June 2nd or something, but 1977. So I had a brand new bicycle and I had a place to live, and I was really irresponsible completely. So, but anyway, so I thought, well, whatever. So I got a job. So I went to this Guru Maharaji had a center in Denver at the time. So I was hanging out with this big crowd of people. I mean, it was a large base of people. Could have been at least 1,000 who lived nearby. And they had ashrams and blah, blah, blah. So I was hanging out with that. And so I thought, well, whatever. So I went to one of these quote unquote satsang meetings, just a big meeting in this old church. Came out, my bike was gone, stolen with another guy's. We were staring at this empty space, okay. So then I went to this job the next morning and I really couldn't do it well. And the guy said, you're fired. And so I thought, well, the only thing left was a bus ticket to Myrtle Beach. So that was a 24-hour bus ride. And so I bought a ticket and I had like $10 in cash or something. With a little backpack full of vitamins and a jean jacket. So I arrived at 10 p.m. in Myrtle Beach, slept under a pine tree right in front of the bus station because it started to rain. And then I hitchhiked up 17. I had no idea of where the center was. All I know is I'd heard of a green gate. That's all I knew. It turns out, I don't know if you were aware of this, there were 2 green gates on the center. One north, which was never used, and the main entrance on the side. And so after a day and a half, I spent the night in a motel hot water heater room. And I finally saw this green gate. And that must be it. I don't know where I'm at, So I hopped over the gate, started walking into the center. And eventually someone caught up with me. I was just one of those.
Yeah, Candy was great.
I should have lived in India.
Candy, she's the.
So anyway, so what happened was I was discovered, and a guy named Walter took me in and he gave me these oversized pants because I'd been in the same clothes for 4 days, and oversized pants and shirt, and went to see Adi that night. Well, in my dysfunction, and again, without going into all that, so I got into a skirmish with some guy after Adi talked in the meeting place. And it was just total dysfunction, psychological as well as psychic. But anyway, so I was taken back to Laura Delavigna's house where Walter was staying. And about an hour later or something, of course, I knew I'd done something inappropriate and all that. But about an hour later, the knock on the door, and in pops Elizabeth. And she looks at me and my story is about how tough Elizabeth really was, how hard, I want to say, but we'll just say tough. But she looks at me and she's talking to me and she's judging me. She's, I think Betty was saying this, but she was scoping me out, like, who is this character, and all this trouble. And in the back of her mind, of course, I'm sure she was thinking, I can't have anyone like this in Myrtle Beach, much less on the center. I don't want him out there creating chaos for Mayor Baba. And so she says, how did you get here? And I said, well, on a bus and blah, blah, blah. And she says, well, do you have a way back to Denver? And I said, no. She said, well, a guy named Earl Starcher is going to pick you up in the morning and buy you a bus ticket one way. He'll buy you breakfast. And she almost did all this on the spot. She'd thought it over, but nonetheless. And that was the end of that. So the next morning, Earl Starcher and I had breakfast somewhere. He paid for it. And I got on the bus, and she told me, she said, and Earl will not leave until you are on the bus. I mean, she's hardcore. Elizabeth was, you didn't mess with Elizabeth. Come on. No, I'm sure nobody did. But anyway, so, okay, fine and dandy. So that was a lonely bus ride back. Oh my God, it was horrible. And it really hurt me deep because I was thinking I was going to go to some Baba community and get reconnected. I had been in New York City at 19 and gone to meetings with the Society for Avatar and Baba and Dr. Kenmore and Anna Rosa. And when he died, it was like he was the big electromagnet, the Telsa magnet, and I was a piece of metal. And I realized that the magnetic field was not really there. So I went back to Denver. But anyway, so getting back to 77. So then I got a job and I was working and I made some money and I saved it. And so I got an airplane ticket round trip on Piedmont Air, this is the day, and got to Myrtle Beach. And I didn't call anybody or tell anybody, nothing. I just showed up, and as usual. So I got on the center. That was all fine. And of course, this was 78 in pretty much June, July, I don't know. And so I met a few people, and somehow in my mind, I had this fantasy going on about some cute girl. I think she was from Oregon, but that's all I remember. So I followed them out to the beach, and they were really annoyed with my behavior. I don't blame them. I'm telling you things that I'm not proud of, but I was sort of fixated on her. I was, I don't know, just this young guy that was lost anyway. But at that moment, all of a sudden, these three guys show on the beach, and I don't know how they knew, but I hadn't done anything. I was just being annoying. But anyway, there was Malcolm and Dennis, and I think someone else, and they were going to carry me back to the center off the beach, right? So Malcolm started talking to me, and I could tell right away he's really, what a nice guy. He is such a nice guy. I mean, and of course, I knew Malcolm from many trips later. But so anyway, they said, you got to come back with us. So we went back, and Elizabeth assigned Dennis to be my guardian, so to speak, chaperone for the rest of the evening. And so here comes Elizabeth. And she says, she was aware of what happened, and she might have mentioned something. But the real point was, how are you going to get back to Denver? God almighty. And it's like, now I'm really almost traumatized. This is the second year in a row. And I knew I had behavioral problems and adjustment problems and all the stuff. But I had set my heart on, well, it was just Baba and being on the center, and it was Baba, but I knew there was community there. And so anyway, I'd been there, I think, a couple of nights. But Elizabeth said, well, how did you get here? I said, I have an airplane ticket. And she said, well, do you have a round trip? I said, yeah. But back then, you couldn't just jump on a plane. So Elizabeth, I think she made some calls or had somebody make some calls. So I could go straight back to Atlanta right now. And then it was up to me to get to Denver. And so I had a layover of 6 days. And but that was Elizabeth. I mean, it was like, it was cut and dried. I was a problem, and it was my problem. And she was sending me back. So I can't remember who took me to the airport. And I'm sure they had to wait until I stepped onto the plane. I think those were the tarmac days. And anyway, I'm laughing, but, I was so dysfunctional that it's pretty obvious what Elizabeth was doing. But I think there's a bigger story with Elizabeth here. And over years and years of more maturity and all this stuff that, at my age, 75, I've been through, Elizabeth was Baba directing me back where I needed to be. And that's the bigger story in all this. I could say, no, Elizabeth was, I mean, I really hurt, I mean, I was so ashamed and felt the word's not degraded, but depressed about my own behavior, dysfunction, maladjustment, all this stuff. So Dennis was there with me in the original kitchen. We'd had something to eat, and there were some people playing songs on an old tape recorder that Baba liked of different artists. And I was just in this deep darkness, sitting across from them on a table, and suddenly one song came on that I recognized. It broke my heart wide open, and I could tell you the whole story basically is that I went into sort of a vision And the vision wasn't directly of Baba. Well, it was, but what it was of my past and my parents. And suddenly I was looking at my father and his eyes, and it was Baba's eyes. It became Baba. And that opened my heart in a way that some of you may know of or heard stories of, but it was, I immediately burst into deep sobbing, tremendous waves of grief. And then I saw within my own heart these two big, huge, dark doors, like the locks on the Panama Canal, just slowly opening. And of course, that was Baba coming into my heart, opening my heart. Anyway, so Dennis came over and asked me if I was all right. And I said, yes. It was all stimulated from a song I'd heard in my youth that Baba listened to, probably Welcome to My World, on this cassette tape. But so I got, of course, to the airport, and then I got to Atlanta. I had nowhere to go and I had $10. And so I walk off the airport, I go to this motel, and it starts to rain lightly, and it's pretty much sundown. And I climb under some bushes along the building, and I'm going to sleep. And all of a sudden, I heard the roar of this engine and these headlights and this talking up above me. And someone had seen me and they thought I was dead, so they called the police. So, so it's a little scenario could be put into a nice movie. But anyway, so they dragged me, the police take me inside, and I'm trespassing. So that's the story. So now what does the this goes into how Baba handles people who come to him seeking help or refuge or just him. But so they bring me in, and there's a guy at the door, a young man, just listening and watching. And then there's the manager and me and two police officers. And they were talking and they were trying to discuss, what can we do for this guy? You know, what can we do? And there was just no obvious solution. I had 6 days before my airplane left for Denver. So at the end of all that, this police officer finally turned to me and said, well, what do you think we should do, Richard? And I said, it was really, really crystal clear. I mean, it was like my mouth opened and these words came out, and I said, well, you're in charge, sir, you're the authority here. So whatever you decide, that's what it should be. And so then all of a sudden, this young man at the back intervenes and says, I'm getting off work now. I could take him to where I live. He lived in a shared apartment with some fellow guys on a Christian Bible campus. He was going to become a minister, and his to-be wife was in Europe touring with a Christian choir, you know. And so he said, you can just stay there, do whatever you want, eat all our food, we don't care, you know. And so I showed him a bunch of pictures of Baba that I just gotten, Hermes pictures, you know, in black and white. And I was just taken care of. I mean, I had no worries, no concerns, no nothing. And
Rick, wait a minute, I'm lost. Where are we now, and what year is this now? When this
it's still the second trip. I'm in Atlanta waiting for my plane.
you're in Atlanta? Oh,
Yeah.
God.
And so Jim was his name, and he was really a nice guy. Took me to his church on Sunday, and then he had to go back just before my plane left to work at the motel for swing shift. So he dropped me off right at the airport. He went to work. I got on my plane and I was back in Denver. But you can see through Elizabeth how Baba just, I mean, I was given a place to live, like I had a great motel room with meals, you know, with the kindest of service. And it was sort of a remarkable story. But so I had a head-on-head. I mean, tete-a-tete, whatever, you know, with Elizabeth Patterson twice. And I was worried about going back to the center, but then I didn't know it really. But Elizabeth died in 80, so my next trip was in 81. And just to cap the story off, I to finish it off a little bit, this was the earlier years for me. So I made it back in 81, and Winnie Barrett contacted Kitty to make double sure that Kitty was fine with me coming and all that kind of stuff. And I had a job, and also I did it round trip. And I was so worried about what I would do on the center. I was almost frightened. And I thought, oh my God, you know, and it turned out it was fall kind of, there was like nobody. There might have been one person staying on the center except me. I don't think there was anybody. And Lee McBride was building the Del Ruba reading room. I mean, it's a Soroja reading room onto the library. So I got called over there to help him a little bit. There was no one there. So I couldn't misbehave. All I could do is just enjoy Bob on the center. So that was my story with Elizabeth. But
Richard.
for years, you know, it was very difficult for me because I think I had intended to live in Myrtle Beach. And Elizabeth put, or Baba, really, it was Baba, put a direct stop to that. Just boom, that's it. No. And I was too dysfunctional. I truly was.
Well, like you said, Elizabeth had a way to, what we used to say, read your beads.
Yep. That's what she did.
She would, yeah. And I think it's a wonderful story, Richard. Thank you for sharing everything. And I'm so glad you got to go in 82 and just kind of be there and enjoy the people. Well, the one or two people.
Well, after that, my life really changed and I started adjusting properly, went to college, and then I went 84, 5, 6, and 7. And I mean, the center is like so many. I feel it's my real home, but I've never been able to live there.
I understand. All right, I think this will be the last one, Michal. If you would, we'll wind it up with you. Jai Baba.
Yeah, so I'm really touched by your story, Richard. And it's like Elizabeth is here and she's hearing these stories. It's like closing a circle with her. She's seeing it from that side too. It's both sides, you know, you're seeing it and she is seeing it. And thank you for telling that story. Look at Baba, how you started and where you are now. How we all started and how we all are here now. We have made some strides forward, each one of us. And I'm so touched by your story because I think that this is exactly what Baba likes. He likes us to be totally open, totally vulnerable with everything that we want to just give and leave behind in Baba's hands. And I think that Elizabeth invited you to share this. She was here totally when we are gathering in her name, she is here. And I like what she did. I like what you accepted it, the way you accepted it. I like that she's here now to let you tell it from your side. And I think she's addressing your heart. If she was too harsh, she's probably just kissing you now and hugging you now and saying sometimes, you know, she was also too tough, you know, she had to protect the place. And so I, in my own, you know, I hug you. You're very brave. And you went all this way to come to this day the way you are, right next to Baba. Thank you very much. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. And thank you, Michal. All right, let's just have a moment of silence together. Jai Baba. Avatar, Meher Baba ki Jai. Avatar.
Avatar, Mayor Baba.
Meher Baba ki jai. Avatar, Meher Baba ki jai.
Thank you, everyone.
Jai Baba.
Wow.
Thank you, Baba, Elizabeth Patterson.
And thank you, Ruthie.
Thank you, Judy and Candy too, but I love that story, Judy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for being what you were and are for each one of us. Even when we didn't meet you, you've impressed me greatly, and I have always wanted to know more about you. Thank you, Baba, for your beautiful beings and your lovers, which is us. Thank you, Baba.
Marcia,
Thank you, Baba. Hey, Baba. Thank you, everybody.
hey, Baba. Marcia, did you have something? You put your hand up and took it down?
No, I didn't meet Elizabeth, but I've read and I know about her, but I wasn't fortunate, so kind of
Wow.
thank you. Yeah.
I'm gonna go because I've got lunch with the kids.
Uh,
That
What
was awesome. Thank you.
Power pack meeting. Wow.
As I said, I knew a few other men that had the exact same experience. But they had to get ready for Elizabeth because she was going to read the beads right there.
Really? Yeah.
And it changed a lot of their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I too have stopped at that little memorial for Elizabeth between Baba's house and Deruba. I didn't know it was there, and I looked over there one and I thought, what is this? And I think, isn't there a coat or something buried underneath the?
I'm not sure. I know there's a coat buried in India, and I
Oh.
can't remember about locally. But next time I see Buzz Wendy, I'll ask them what else is down buried with Elizabeth there. Some of her ashes, I know.
I am so grateful for Elizabeth for the center, but also the amazing quality and quantity of photographs of Baba. She was part of all that, you know. I mean,
Good point, honey. Yeah.
really unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think in Karen's bio, she did say that it was a coat that Baba had given to her.
That was
That's
in
there now, I think so.
Yeah,
Anyway.
thank you for also mentioning about the photographs because she took a lot of photos of Baba. And
Good at it too.
more to come, I think. All right, I'm gonna run. But anybody you guys want to hang out for a while and chat? Because I can make Betty or Marcia host so that you can stay. All right, then I'm gonna close it out with much love to everyone.
Thank you.
good seeing all of you, even though I'm hiding.
Bye, Baba.